My son took out a $150,000 loan in my name and vanished. 7 years later, he showed up for Christmas as if nothing had happened. The deepest pain is not the one that screams. It's the one that whispers in silence while you pretend everything is fine. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller. I am 72 years old, and this story began one July afternoon in my small apartment in the south end of Boston, Massachusetts. I was in my kitchen, my apron stained with chicken gravy, making biscuits for dinner when I heard the familiar steps of Daniel, my youngest son, coming up the building's worn stairs. I always recognized his walk, quick, impatient, as if the world owed him something. He knocked with his usual lack of patience. 3 sharp, dry raps. "Mom, open up. I have great news." When I opened the door, I saw him standing there with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wore a crisp white shirt and expensive-looking trousers. Too expensive for a 35-year-old CPA who was always borrowing money. In his hands, he carried a black leather briefcase, the kind important executives use. "How are you, honey?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Have you eaten?" "I just finished up some chicken noodle soup and meatloaf." "No time for that, Mom. I'm here for something important." He sat down at the table in my small dining nook, that old wooden table I'd bought at a local antique shop when he was a boy. His fingers drummed on the surface while I poured him a glass of iced tea. "Look, Mom," he said, opening the briefcase. "I found an incredible investment opportunity. A company that deals in cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. It's the future of money, Mom. The ones who get in now are going to be millionaires in a few years." I looked at him blankly. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, words that sounded like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. "And what does that have to do with me, son?" Daniel smiled, but there was a chill in his expression. "I need you to sign some papers. It's just to make my participation in the business official. You don't understand these things, but trust me, like you always have. It's just your signature, nothing more." I took out my reading glasses and looked at the documents. Tiny print, huge numbers, technical terms that swam before my eyes. I saw my name printed multiple times. Eleanor Grace Miller. I saw amounts that seemed fantastical. $150,000. I saw the word loan repeated like an echo. "Daniel, son, this says it's a loan. I don't want to owe anyone anything." The smile vanished from his face. "Mom, it's just a formality. The bank needs collateral, someone to back the investment. But the money goes straight into my business accounts. You won't pay a thing. On the contrary, when this takes off, I'm going to buy you a bigger house, a luxury condo on the Upper East Side, with a garden and everything." I hesitated. Something in my stomach twisted, the way it did when I was a child and sensed a storm was coming. "I don't know, son. Your father always said never to sign anything you didn't fully understand." Daniel's face hardened. He leaned forward and his voice changed, becoming lower, colder. "What? You don't trust your own son? Mom, you always sacrificed for all of us. You worked double shifts at the garment factory to pay for our schooling. You sold your gold earrings so I could study accounting. Now that I can finally give something back to you, are you going to play the martyr?" His words stung like slaps. It was true. I had worked 18 years in that factory, from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, sewing school uniforms until my fingers bled. I had sold my engagement ring when Daniel needed money for his final year of college. I had eaten canned soup and toast for months so he and his siblings could eat meat. "Besides," he continued, his voice now sounding wounded, "after everything I did for you when Dad died, have you forgotten who helped you with the funeral expenses? Who came over every day to comfort you?" That was also true. When Robert, my husband, died of complications from diabetes 5 years earlier, Daniel had been the only one of my 3 children who didn't abandon me. He had paid half the funeral costs, slept on my sofa the first few weeks so I wouldn't feel alone, and had been my companion during those dark months where every morning felt like a painful miracle. "Look, Mom," his voice softened, returning to the tone of the little boy who comforted my nightmares. "Just trust me one more time. This is the last thing I'll ever ask of you. After this, you'll be the one with money to spare. I promise you, on Dad's memory. I took the pen. It was a cheap blue ballpoint pen, the kind they sell at the drugstore. My hand trembled as I wrote my name on each page. Eleanor Grace Miller. Eleanor Grace Miller. Eleanor Grace Miller. My signature over and over, authorizing something I didn't understand out of love for someone I blindly trusted. All set, Mom. Don't worry about a thing. In 6 months, when you see the results, you'll thank me. He kissed my forehead, took the papers, and headed for the door. Wait, Daniel. When will I see you again? I'll call you in a few days, Mom. I have to travel to San Francisco now to close the deal. But soon, very soon, you'll hear from me. He closed the door, and I was left there, in my silent dining nook, with the smell of meatloaf filling the air and a strange feeling in my chest, as if I had signed my own death sentence without knowing it. That was the last time I saw my son, for 7 years. The first sign that something was terribly wrong arrived exactly 33 days later, on a Tuesday morning that began like any other. I was watering my geraniums on the small balcony when I heard insistent knocking at the door. It wasn't the familiar tap of my neighbors or the soft rap of the mail carrier. It was something urgent, official. I opened it and found a young man in a gray suit, blue tie, and a briefcase in his hands. His smile was professional but cold. Mrs. Eleanor Grace Miller? Yes, that's me. My name is Mr. Thomas Riley from First Liberty Bank. I need to speak with you about your account and some recent transactions that require your immediate attention. My heart began to pound faster. I invited the man in and poured him a glass of water while he arranged papers on my dining table. Ma'am, I see here that you authorized a personal loan for $150,000 last month. However, we have not received the first payment, which was due a week ago. Furthermore, your debit account has been overdrawn several times. There must be a mistake, Mr. Riley. I didn't ask for any loan. My son Daniel asked me to sign some papers, but he told me it was for a business deal of his, and that I wouldn't have to pay anything. The man frowned and checked his documents. Ma'am, according to our records, you are the primary debtor on the loan. Your son is listed as a beneficiary, but the legal responsibility is entirely yours. Here is your signature on multiple documents. My world began to spin. I recognized my handwriting. My signature repeated over and over on documents that I now understood with horrifying clarity. It was I who owed that $150,000, plus the interest that was already beginning to pile up. But my son told me he would pay for everything, that it was just a formality. I regret to inform you that Mr. Daniel Miller withdrew the entirety of the funds 3 weeks ago and, according to our records, closed all his accounts with us the next day. We have no way to contact him. The words hit me like physical blows. Closed his accounts. We have no way to contact him. Each phrase was a dagger sinking deeper into my chest. What does that mean for me? It means, ma'am, that we need to establish a payment plan immediately, or we will have to proceed with legal action. The first payment of $2,800 has been past due for a week. $2,800. It was more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. It was more cash than I had held in my entire adult life. After Mr. Riley left, with promises that we will find a solution, I sat in my living room and picked up the phone with hands that couldn't stop shaking. I dialed Daniel's number from memory. The number you have dialed is not available at this time. I dialed again. The same recording. I tried WhatsApp. My messages showed a single gray checkmark. Undelivered. I called his job, the accounting firm where he had worked for the past 5 years. Daniel Miller? Oh yes, he resigned a month ago. Said he was moving abroad for a business opportunity. He didn't leave any contact information. The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud that echoed in my empty apartment like a gunshot. That afternoon, desperate, I decided to call my other 2 children. First, I tried Susan, my eldest daughter, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband and 2 kids. Mom? What's wrong? You never call at this hour. Sue, I need to talk to you about Daniel. Something terrible has happened. I told her everything. Every detail of the papers, the loan, Daniel's disappearance. I expected understanding, support, perhaps help to figure out what had happened. Her response chilled my blood. Oh, Mom, with your dramas again? Always exaggerating everything, always playing the victim. Daniel is a professional, an accountant. If you signed something with him, it's surely legitimate. But Sue, he disappeared. He's not answering his phone. He quit his job. Mom? You're a grown woman. At 72, you should know that business is complicated. You can't call your children every time you don't understand something. I have my own family to take care of. She hung up. I was left with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone that sounded like the echo of my own loneliness. I tried Michael, my middle son, who worked as a mechanic at a dealership in Houston, Texas. What's up, Mom? Mike, your brother Daniel. Hold on. What did the spoiled brat do now? Did he spend your Social Security check on his computer courses? I explained the situation. Michael listened in silence, and when I finished, he let out a bitter laugh. Wow, Mom. Well, they played you for a fool good. But I'm not surprised at all. Daniel was always the smartest of us, and you always spoiled him more than us. Now he can deal with the consequences. Mike, please. I need help understanding what I can do. Look, Mom, I have my own problems. The economy is crazy hard. I barely make ends meet for my family. If you signed those papers, that's your problem. Learn to live with your mistakes and don't drag us into your stupid decisions. And he hung up too. I sat on the floor of my living room, between the same tiles where I had watched my children take their first steps, where we had celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where Robert and I had built our family for 30 years. Now those walls were witnesses to my deepest humiliation. I couldn't eat that night. The meatloaf I had prepared grew cold on the stove while I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how I had reached this point. How the son for whom I had sacrificed the most, the one who had been with me in my darkest moment, could have betrayed me so coldly. The bank started calling every day. Certified letters arrived every week. The interest grew like a disease, multiplying without my being able to do anything to stop it. I sold my television, the one Robert and I had bought to watch the evening news together. I sold my sewing machine, which I had used to make uniforms for extra money for years. I sold my gold earrings, the only ones left from my marriage, all to pay the interest on a debt that was growing faster than I could reduce it. One afternoon, while sweeping the entrance to my building, I heard Ms. Gloria Jenkins, my longtime neighbor, talking to her friend in a low voice but loud enough for me to hear. There goes poor Eleanor. They say her son swindled her. What a shame to raise a thief like that. You kill yourself raising children only for them to betray you that way. Well, she was also to blame. How can she sign something without understanding? She's too old to be so trusting. Their words cut through me like knives. I had not only lost my money and my peace of mind, I had also lost my dignity in front of the people who had known me for decades. That night, for the first time in my life, I thought maybe it would have been better not to wake up the next day. The following months turned into a downward spiral that seemed to have no bottom. Every day brought a new humiliation, a new loss, a new confirmation that my life as I knew it was over forever. The bank had garnished my Social Security checks. The $2,500 I received each month for my years working in the textile factory now went directly to pay the interest on Daniel's debt, without my being able to touch a single penny. The teller, a young woman of about 25 with long, pink-painted nails, explained with a forced smile that this would continue until the principal debt was settled. Those are the rules, ma'am. The bank has the right to withhold any income from the debtor until the debt is cleared. Debtor. That word had become my new identity. I was no longer Eleanor, the woman who had raised 3 children by working double shifts. I was no longer the widow who had buried her husband with dignity. Now I was the debtor, the one who signed without reading, the one who let herself be fooled by her own son. My diet was reduced to the basics: rice, canned beans, and tortillas when I had money to buy them. I stopped eating breakfast so my food would last longer. I learned to work miracles with a pound of rice and half a pound of beans to stretch them for the entire week. Coffee became a luxury I only allowed myself on Sundays, mixed with so much sugar and powdered creamer that it looked more like sweet water than coffee. One morning, while doing calculations in an old notebook, figuring out how many days I could stretch my last $20 bill, there was a knock at my door. It was Mrs. Brenda Hayes, the building manager, with an uncomfortable expression on her face. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Peterson asked me to talk to you. You're 3 months behind on your maintenance fee." It was true. The $300 a month I owed for building maintenance had become impossible to cover. $300 that once seemed like nothing now represented 10 days of food. "How much time can they give me, Brenda?" "Look, Eleanor, I feel terrible. But Mr. Peterson says if you don't pay in 2 weeks, they're going to have to issue you a citation. You know how Frank is. Very strict about payments." Mr. Frank Peterson, the building administrator, was a man in his 60s who had made collecting fees his personal mission. I had seen him evict entire families for minor arrears. For him, personal circumstances did not exist, only accounts that balanced or didn't balance. After Mrs. Hayes left, I sat in my kitchen and tried to find something else to sell. My eyes scanned every corner of the house that had been my home for 20 years. There was almost nothing left of value. The furniture was old and worn, with no resale value. The remaining dinnerware was the basic set I needed to eat. Robert's few books were worthless on the second-hand market. My gaze stopped at the small altar in the living room, where I kept photos of Robert and a crucifix. There were also Robert's wedding rings, which I had kept after his death as a sacred treasure. They were 14-karat gold, nothing extraordinary, but they represented 30 years of marriage, 30 years of love, fights, reconciliations, and shared plans. I took the rings in my hands. They weighed more than I remembered, or perhaps it was my heart that had grown lighter. I went to the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. "Forgive me, Robert," I whispered. "Forgive me. But I have no choice." The pawn shop was 6 blocks from my building. I had passed it thousands of times in my 20 years living in the neighborhood, but I never imagined I would one day have to go inside. The place smelled of disinfectant mixed with desperation. The walls were lined with objects that other people had been forced to sacrifice: guitars, televisions, tools, jewelry. The man behind the counter was heavy-set and had nicotine-stained teeth. He examined the rings with a magnifying glass, weighing them on a digital scale. "I'll give you $150 for both. Couldn't you make it $200? They are pure gold. They were very expensive." The man looked at me with the expression of someone who had heard that plea thousands of times. "Ma'am, gold is down right now, and these aren't designer rings. $150, take it or leave it." I took the money. $150 for 30 years of marriage. $5 for each year of love. The paper I signed said I had 30 days to recover the rings by paying $180. I knew those 30 days would pass, and the rings would become part of the pawn shop's inventory forever. I walked back home with the money in my shopping bag, feeling like I had sold a piece of my soul. On the way, I crossed paths with Ms. Gloria Jenkins, who looked me up and down with a mix of pity and scorn. "How are you, Eleanor?" "Fine, thank you." I lied. "Oh, that's good. Because yesterday I saw you leave the pawn shop with a bag and I got worried. You never know how things are with the neighbors." Her comment was not innocent. It was her way of confirming that she knew exactly where I had been. By tomorrow, the whole building would know that Eleanor Miller had been forced to pawn her belongings to survive. That night, while eating my dinner of rice and beans, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Susan, my eldest daughter. "Mom, how are you?" For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe she had reconsidered. Maybe she was calling to offer help, or at least understanding. "Sue, it's good to hear from you. I'm going through a difficult time." "Yes, Mom. That's why I'm calling. I heard you're telling people that Daniel stole money from you." My hope plummeted like a building without foundations. "Sue, it's the truth. Your brother made me sign loan documents and then disappeared." "Mom, you can't go around defaming your own son. Daniel is a respected professional. If you signed something you didn't understand, that was your irresponsibility, not his fault." "But honey..." "No, Mom. Listen to me carefully. Stop spreading those stories. You're making us all look bad. People are going to think we come from a family of thieves. I have a reputation to protect. My children go to private schools. My husband has a respectable business. Patricia's words hurt me more than the banks, more than the neighbors' looks, more than the humiliation of pawning Robert's rings. So what do you want me to do? Stay silent while I sink into debt? I want you to take responsibility for your own decisions and stop blaming others for your mistakes. And if you need money, find a job. At 72, you can still work part-time." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stayed seated in my kitchen, phone in hand, finally understanding the full dimension of my abandonment. I had not only lost money and possessions, I had lost my family. My own children had decided it was easier to blame me than to face the reality of what Daniel had done. That night, for the first time in months, I cried until I ran out of tears. I cried for Robert, who had left before seeing his favorite son's betrayal. I cried for the mother I had been, who had given everything without keeping anything for herself. I cried for the woman I was now, alone and betrayed in a house that soon might no longer be hers. But amidst those tears, something small but firm began to grow in my chest. A spark of rage that had been dormant for months of self-pity and guilt. For the first time since everything began, I didn't ask myself what I had done wrong. For the first time, I asked myself what I could do to make things different. The days blurred into a mess of basic survival and constant humiliations. My routine was reduced to the essential: getting up, checking if I had anything for breakfast, walking to the market with the few dollars I had left, returning, and locking myself in my house until the next day. I had stopped socializing with neighbors because their looks of pity were more painful than loneliness. One October morning, while sweeping my small balcony, I saw the mail carrier approaching with a certified envelope. My stomach automatically clenched. Certified envelopes never brought good news in my new reality. "Mrs. Eleanor Miller, here is correspondence from the court." I signed the receipt with trembling hands. The envelope bore the official seal of the Superior Court of Suffolk County, Massachusetts. Inside, a document full of legal terms I could barely understand, but one phrase leaped out like a scream in the silence. Precautionary real property attachment. My house. They wanted to seize my house. I read the document 3 times, trying to understand every word. The bank had filed a civil suit to recover the loan money, plus interest, plus legal fees. The total amount now stood at $350,000. A fortune I could never gather even if I worked the rest of my life. I had 15 days to present my defense to the court, or the attachment would proceed automatically. 15 days to explain why I shouldn't lose the only thing I had left in the world. That afternoon, I walked the 12 blocks to the courthouse, carrying the document in my shopping bag as if it were a bomb about to explode. The building was imposing, with marble columns and hallways full of lawyers in expensive suits, hurrying with the speed of those who bill by the hour. I stood in line at the information window. The clerk, a young woman with her hair in a perfect bun, attended to me with the cold efficiency of someone who sees human tragedies parade by every day. "I need information about this document," I said, handing her the paper. She quickly reviewed it, typed something into her computer, and looked at me with an expression that mixed professionalism with a hint of compassion. "Ma'am, you need to hire an attorney to represent you in this process. Without legal representation, it is highly likely that you will lose the case. How much does a lawyer cost? It depends on the case, but a process like this can cost between $50,000 and $100,000. $50,000. It was like asking me to buy the moon. What I had left in my purse wouldn't even cover the bus fare back home. Are there any free lawyers? Yes, there is the public defender's office, but they have a very long waiting list. And honestly, ma'am, in civil debt cases like yours, it's very difficult to win." I left the courthouse feeling smaller than ever. On the sidewalk, I sat on a planter and took out my old cell phone to call Michael, my middle son. Perhaps the seriousness of the situation would make him reconsider. "Hello? Mike, it's your mom. I urgently need to talk to you." "What's wrong now?" "They are going to seize the house, son. The bank sued over Daniel's loan, and if I don't get a lawyer in 15 days, I'm going to lose my home." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "And what do you want me to do, Mom?" "Mike, please. It's the house where you grew up, where your dad lived his last years. I can't lose it." "Look, Mom, I told you from the beginning that whole mess with Daniel would have consequences. You signed, you take responsibility. I don't have money for expensive lawyers." I'm not asking you to pay everything, just to help me. No, Mom. I'm tired of everyone in the family making a mess and the rest of us having to clean it up. Everyone deals with their own problems. And he hung up. I tried once more with Susan, although I knew the answer would be just as cruel. Mom, I already told you that you can't keep blaming Daniel for your poor decisions. If you're going to lose the house, find a cheaper apartment. At your age, you don't need that much space. Susan, that house holds all the memories of your father, of you when you were children. Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls. Besides, maybe this will teach you to be more responsible with money. She also hung up. That night, while eating my eternal combination of rice and beans, I touched all the walls of my house. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family. The living room where Robert and I had watched the evening news every night for 20 years. The room where my children had slept, where I had comforted their nightmares and celebrated their achievements. In my bedroom closet, I found a shoebox full of old photographs. There was Daniel at 5, dressed as a pirate at a school party. Susan in her first communion dress, smiling without her front teeth. Michael in his football uniform, dirty and happy after a game. How had they become strangers? At what moment had the love I had sown in their hearts turned into this calculated coldness? The answer came 2 days later, when I least expected it. I was cleaning the refrigerator, trying to make the few groceries I had left look more abundant than they were, when I found a folded piece of paper behind the butter container. It was an old, yellowed letter, written in Daniel's handwriting. I recognized it immediately because it was the same careful handwriting with which he had signed all my documents of ruin. The letter was addressed to a Jason and dated 3 years earlier. As I read it, my world collapsed once more, but now in a different, more definitive way. Jason, man, I've got everything planned. My old lady is getting senile. She believes everything I tell her. I'm going to convince her to sign a loan in her name. I'll tell her it's for a Bitcoin deal or some BS like that. With that cash, I'm headed to London. I have some excellent investment opportunities in crypto there that will make me a millionaire. If it works out, I'll be back in 5 years with a fortune in euros. If it doesn't, well, the old hag can deal with the debt. She's lived her life. I'm just starting mine. My siblings will be on my side because they also know it's time for someone else to take care of the old lady. It's too hard to support an elderly woman when you have your own plans. See you soon in London, buddy. The letter fell from my hands as if it were burning. Daniel had not acted on impulse, out of desperation, or because of an opportunity that suddenly presented itself. He had planned my destruction for years. He had calculated every word, every smile, every gesture of affection during Robert's funeral, all with the sole objective of gaining my trust, only to betray me. She's lived her life. Those 4 words echoed in my head like hammer blows. To my own son, I was already a useless old woman whose only function was to facilitate the money for his dreams of overseas wealth. I sat on my kitchen floor, the crumpled letter in my hands, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. Instead of tears, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. A pure, clean, powerful rage. It wasn't the destructive rage of someone seeking revenge. It was the constructive rage of someone who finally understands that she has been fighting the wrong battle. I didn't have to prove my innocence to anyone. I didn't have to win the love of children who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I didn't have to justify my right to exist with dignity. For the first time in my life, I had to fight for myself, only for myself. That night, instead of lying down to mourn, I sat at my dining table with a notebook and a pen. I wrote down everything I remembered about the signatures, Daniel's promises, the dates and names. I wrote about the letter I had found, about the phone calls, about every detail that might be important. If I was going to lose my house, at least I would lose it fighting. And if Daniel thought he could destroy me without consequences, he was about to discover that he had gravely underestimated the woman who had raised him. The next day, with my notebook full of notes and Daniel's letter tucked into my purse as if it were pure gold, I headed back to the courthouse. This time, I did not go as the defeated woman of days earlier. I walked with my back straight, carrying the weight of my indignation like a shield. The line for the public defender's office was long, full of people who, like me, had reached the point where free justice was their only hope. I stood in line behind a young man carrying a folder tied with rubber bands, and an older woman whispering prayers while waiting her turn. After 3 hours of waiting, I finally reached the window. The attorney who attended to me was named Andrea Andy Perez, a woman in her 40s with glasses and an expression that spoke of too many cases and too little time. "Ma'am, I see you have a civil debt attachment case. I must warn you that these cases are very difficult to win, especially when there are documents signed by your own hand. Ms. Perez, I have evidence that my son deliberately misled me. Here is the proof." I showed her Daniel's letter. The attorney read it with increasing attention, and for the first time, I saw something akin to genuine interest in her eyes. "This changes things, Mrs. Miller. This letter constitutes evidence of premeditation and malice. We could argue that you were a victim of familial fraud and credit identity theft. Does that mean I can win? It means we have grounds to fight. I won't promise you a victory, but I can assure you that we are going to make your son account for his actions." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Ms. Perez explained that we would file a counterclaim for fraud and emotional distress, in addition to requesting the court to suspend the attachment while the circumstances of the loan were investigated. "We will need all the evidence you can gather. Any message, any WhatsApp conversation, any witness who was present when he asked you to sign the documents." I left the courthouse with a strange feeling. It wasn't happiness. I was still very far from that. But it was something I hadn't felt in months. I had a plan. I had allies. I had a chance to fight. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own tragedy. I searched every corner of my house for evidence. I found receipts for the money Daniel had borrowed from me over the years, always with promises to pay it back as soon as I get paid for the next project. I found WhatsApp messages where he asked me for favors, spoke to me affectionately, promised me that he would soon give me the life I deserve. I also found something more valuable: the phone number of Jason, the friend to whom the letter was addressed. I had saved it in my contacts when Daniel asked me to give him messages some years ago. The call to Jason was one of the most difficult conversations of my life, but also one of the most revealing. "Mrs. Miller? Daniel's mom?" "Yes, Jason. I need to ask you something about my son. Do you know where he is?" There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I didn't know you didn't know. Daniel has been living in Valencia, Spain, for 2 years. He has a wine import business and a Spanish girlfriend. He lives very well, in a very expensive apartment in the center of the city." Every word was like a stab. While I was selling my wedding rings to buy rice, my son was living in Europe with the money he had stolen from my future. "Jason, did you know he tricked me into getting a loan?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Ma'am, he told me he had gotten money for the business, but I didn't know it came from you. I thought he had investors or something. It was a white lie, but I decided not to press him further. I already had enough information for my lawyer." The most painful moment came when I decided to try to contact Daniel directly. Ms. Perez had given me the number of a private investigator who, for very little money, had managed to find my son's contact information in Spain. I dialed the international number with trembling hands. After several rings, I heard his voice. The same voice that had asked for my trust that July afternoon, but now with a slightly Europeanized accent. "Hello? Daniel, it's your mother." The silence that followed lasted an eternity. "Mom? How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter, son. I need us to talk." "Mom, I'm very busy. I have a meeting in 5 minutes." "Daniel, they are going to seize the house. The bank is suing over the loan you took out. I need you to come back and fix this." His response chilled my blood. "Mom, have you forgotten that you signed those papers? I didn't force you to do anything. Besides, I invested that money in legitimate businesses. If they failed, it's not my fault." "Son, I have your letter. The letter where you wrote to Jason that you were deliberately going to trick me." Another silence, but this one had a different tone. It was the silence of someone who had just realized that their perfect lie had a fatal flaw. "I don't know what letter you're talking about, Mom. And honestly, I don't have time for your dramas. I'm past that stage of my life. I have a new family now, new responsibilities. You've lived your life. Let me live mine in peace. You've lived your life. The same words from the letter. The words that summarized my own son's philosophy of life. I was a disposable obstacle on his path to wealth and success. Daniel, I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you, I sent you to college, and I helped you when Dad died. We're even. Now everyone goes their separate ways. He hung up. I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, but for the first time, I didn't cry. The conversation had an unexpected effect. It had completely killed any hope I still had of recovering the son I thought I had raised. There was nothing left to save, no relationship to rebuild. Only justice remained. That night, I called Miss Perez and told her about the conversation. I also gave her all the details Jason had shared about the life of luxury Daniel was leading in Spain with my money. Perfect, Mrs. Miller. This strengthens our case immensely. A son living in luxury abroad while his mother faces the seizure of her home is a very powerful image for any judge. Do you really think we can win? Ma'am, I have more confidence now, and there is something else we can do. We will request that your son's bank accounts be frozen, both in the U.S. and in Spain. If we can prove that the money he has comes from the fraud he committed against you, we can recover some of the assets. For the first time in almost a year, I went to sleep feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, justice existed, and that perhaps, just perhaps, my son had gravely underestimated the woman who had raised him to be a better person than he had chosen to be. The next day I woke up with a new feeling. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't the despair that had accompanied me for months either. It was determination. A cold, clear determination that, regardless of the outcome, I was going to fight until the end. Daniel had taken my money, my peace of mind, my trust in my family, but he had made one mistake. He had left evidence of his betrayal, and now that evidence was going to become the weapon I would use to reclaim my dignity. The following months were an emotional roller coaster that I never thought I would have the strength to endure. Ms. Perez had managed to temporarily suspend the attachment while the legal process unfolded, but that only meant the sword was still hanging over my head, barely held by a bureaucratic thread that could break at any moment. During those months, I learned things about the legal system that no mother should have to learn. I learned that justice is slow, costly, and not always fair. I learned that being right does not guarantee winning. I learned that fighting against your own child in court is an experience that changes you forever, that kills something inside you, but also gives birth to something new and stronger. The day of the first hearing, I arrived at the courthouse dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue dress that had belonged to my sister, black shoes that I had polished until they shone like mirrors, and the costume pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wanted the judge to see a dignified woman, not a victim. Ms. Perez had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing prepared me for seeing Daniel enter the courtroom accompanied by a lawyer who clearly cost more money than I had seen in my entire life. My son wore a suit that looked straight out of a magazine, a gold watch on his wrist, and walked with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the winning cards. When our eyes met for the first time in over 2 years, I expected to see something. Remorse, shame, pain, any emotion that indicated there was something left of the child I had raised. But his eyes looked at me with the coldness of a stranger, as if I were simply another annoying legal obstacle he had to overcome to continue with his life. His lawyer, a tall, thin man with a smile that looked practiced in the mirror, began his argument by painting Daniel as a responsible son who had tried to help his mother with her financial problems. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith when he agreed to be the beneficiary of a loan that his mother voluntarily requested. The documents clearly show that Mrs. Eleanor Miller signed all the required papers without any coercion. If she subsequently failed to meet the payments, that is a responsibility she assumed at the time of signing. Hearing that distorted version of events made my blood boil, but Ms. Perez had taught me to maintain my composure. My moment would come. When my attorney presented the letter Daniel had written to Jason, the confident expression on my son's face changed for the first time. I saw his eyes dart nervously toward his lawyer, how his hands began to fidget on the table. Your Honor, Miss Perez said, this letter, written in the defendant's own hand, clearly demonstrates that premeditation and malice existed in the deception against my client. The textual words are, "I'm going to convince her to sign a loan in her name. I'll tell her it's for a Bitcoin deal. If it doesn't, well, the old hag can deal with the debt." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the judge, an older man who seemed to have seen every kind of human tragedy, raised his eyebrows in surprise. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that the letter might be fake, that there was no way to verify its authenticity, that it had been obtained illegally, but Ms. Perez was prepared. She had ordered a handwriting analysis that confirmed the writing was Daniel's, and she had testimony from several neighbors who had seen my son taking items from my house after I signed the documents. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs but a steady voice. I had practiced my statement in the mirror for weeks, but being there, in front of the judge, with Daniel looking at me with that coldness, was different from anything I had imagined. Your Honor, I trusted my son because he was my son, because he had been with me when his father died, because he promised he would take care of me. I never imagined that someone who came from my own flesh could plan my destruction with such coldness. My voice cracked slightly as I continued. He knew I didn't understand loans or banks. He knew I would sign anything he asked me to because I trusted him blindly. And he used that trust as a weapon to steal not only my money, but my peace of mind, my home, my dignity. When I finished speaking, there was a moment of silence in the room. Even Daniel's lawyer seemed uncomfortable, but my son showed no emotion. He remained seated, looking at his hands, as if my testimony was merely an annoying formality he had to endure. The most devastating moment came when the judge directly asked Daniel if he had anything to say in his defense. My son stood up, adjusted his tie, and with a clear voice and not the slightest hint of remorse said, "Your Honor, I invested that money in legitimate businesses. If the investments didn't work out as I expected, that is not my fault. My mother signed those documents as a responsible adult, knowing the implications. I cannot be held responsible for her imprudent financial decisions." He did not mention once that I was his mother. He showed not an ounce of guilt or regret. He spoke of me as if I were a stranger who had made a mistake in judgment and now wanted to blame him for the consequences. That night, back in my house, I sat in my living room and for the first time in months, I didn't feel sad. I felt empty, but it was a different kind of emptiness. It was the emptiness that remains when you finally accept that someone you loved never truly existed, that the person you had idealized was just a construct of your own need for maternal love. The legal process dragged on for 6 more months. There were hearings, presentation of additional evidence, expert testimonies. Throughout that time, my other 2 children maintained their distance. Susan even called me once to ask me to drop the lawsuit because it was making the whole family look bad. "Don't you realize this is going to be in the newspapers?" she said. "Don't you think about your grandchildren, how they will feel when they find out their grandmother sued their uncle? And don't you think about how I feel, knowing that my own children prefer to protect a thief rather than support their mother?" I replied. She hung up and didn't call again. Michael was more direct in his cruelty. "Mom, stop with the BS. Daniel went to London. He's making a life for himself. Why do you want to screw him over? At the end of the day, you're old. You don't need that much money anyway. Leave him alone. You're old. You don't need that much money anyway." As if my age were a justification for theft. As if reaching 72 automatically meant giving up my right to justice and dignity. But there was something my children didn't understand. I was no longer fighting just for the money. I was fighting for something much more important. I was fighting for my right to exist as something more than a silent victim. I was fighting against the idea that elderly mothers must endure any abuse simply because they raised their abusers. The verdict arrived on a Tuesday in March, almost 2 years after everything began. The judge had deliberated for 3 weeks, and when Ms. Perez called me with the news, her voice held an emotion I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Miller, we won. We won everything." The judge had ruled completely in my favor. He had declared the loan void for having been obtained through fraud and deception. He had ordered the immediate freezing of all Daniel's accounts, both in the U.S. and in Spain. He had condemned my son to pay compensation for emotional distress equivalent to $500,000. And most importantly, he had ordered Daniel to return to the U.S. to face criminal charges for familial fraud and identity theft. But the judicial victory was only the beginning. The real triumph was what I had discovered about myself during those 2 years of struggle: that I was stronger than I had believed, that I deserved respect and dignity, that I didn't have to apologize for demanding justice. That night, for the first time in almost 3 years, I slept completely peacefully. The notification that Daniel had been arrested at the Madrid airport arrived 6 weeks after the verdict. Ms. Perez called me on a Friday morning with a mix of professional satisfaction and something that sounded almost like disbelief. "Mrs. Miller, your son was detained while trying to board a flight to Dubai. Apparently, he had planned to move there to evade the legal consequences, but the international extradition order reached the airport before him." During the weeks that followed, events unfolded with a speed that left me breathless. Daniel's accounts in Spain were effectively frozen, revealing a fortune that exceeded 2 million euros. My son had used my money as initial capital for cryptocurrency investments that, by sheer luck, had multiplied exponentially during his stay in Europe. The money he had stolen from my future had become the foundation of an estate that included a luxury apartment in Valencia, a wine import business, and a Bitcoin portfolio worth more than everything I had owned in my entire life. But the most bitter irony was discovering that while I was selling Robert's wedding rings to buy rice, Daniel had been sending money monthly to an account in the Cayman Islands to evade taxes. The accountant who had been my son had used all his financial knowledge not to build an honest life, but to perfect his theft. When he finally returned to the U.S., handcuffed and flanked by 2 Interpol agents, I was waiting for him at the airport. I hadn't gone to gloat or enjoy his humiliation. I had gone because I needed to see him with my own eyes, needed to confirm that the man who stepped off that plane was truly the boy I had raised with so much love. I watched him walk through the airport corridor, no longer with the arrogant confidence he had shown in the courtroom, but with the slumped posture of someone who finally understood that the consequences had come to collect their debt. When our eyes met through the glass of the waiting room, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: fear. It wasn't fear of jail or legal consequences. It was the fear of a child who finally understands that he has lost his mother's love forever. It was the fear of someone who realizes that some betrayals are unforgivable. That night, in the quiet of my house that was no longer in danger of being seized, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. In less than 3 years, I had gone from being a quiet widow with a modest pension to being, technically, a woman with access to a multi-million-dollar fortune. Because that was what the judicial ruling meant. All the assets Daniel had acquired with the stolen money legally belonged to me. The apartment in Valencia, the wine business, the cryptocurrency, everything had to be liquidated to compensate for the damage he had caused me. But wealth, I discovered, did not feel as I had imagined it would. The first decision I made was to refuse to live in the Valencia apartment that now belonged to me. When Ms. Perez suggested I could move there and live like a European millionaire, my response was immediate and firm. I would never set foot in a place built with my pain. Instead, I ordered the apartment to be sold and the money transferred to a U.S. account. I did the same with the wine business and with the greater part of the Bitcoin. All that fortune that had been born of my betrayal returned to its place of origin, converted into U.S. dollars and deposited in the same bank that had once threatened to take my house. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing Daniel in jail. It was the call I received from the very same Mr. Thomas Riley, who had come to my house 3 years earlier to notify me of my debt. Now his voice had a completely different tone, a deference that bordered on the subservient. "Mrs. Miller, it is an honor to inform you that the bank has decided to offer you our premium wealth management services. With your new financial situation, we feel we could help you maximize the return on your assets." I interrupted him with a smile in my voice. "Mr. Riley, do you remember me? 3 years ago, you came to my house to threaten to take away my home. You called me an irresponsible debtor." The silence on the other end of the line was delicious. Ma'am, those were the bank's policies at the time. The bank's policies haven't changed, Mr. Riley. What changed was my bank account balance. And now that I have money, suddenly I'm worthy of respect. Is that right? Ma'am, we always. Mr. Riley, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with my money. I'm going to take it out of your bank and move it to a financial institution that treats all people with dignity, regardless of how many zeros they have in their account. And I hung up. That afternoon, I opened an account at a local credit union that I had learned about years ago when I was desperately looking for options to save my home. The woman who helped me was the same one who had patiently and kindly explained that they couldn't help me because I didn't have enough income to qualify for a loan. Mrs. Eleanor, it's a pleasure to see you. How are you? How can we help you today? I've come to open a savings account and to make a donation to your loan program for women in vulnerable situations. When I told her the amount I wanted to deposit, her eyes went wide. Ma'am, are you sure about this amount? Completely sure. And I want this money to be used specifically to help elderly women who have been victims of familial fraud. I want them to have access to free legal counsel and psychological support. In the months that followed, my new financial reality opened doors I never knew existed, but it also made me understand the true nature of many human relationships. Suddenly, I had distant relatives who remembered my existence and neighbors who had always been so kind to me. Susan called me for the first time in 2 years, her voice sweet in a way I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. Mom, I'm so glad everything worked out favorably in the end. I always had faith that justice would prevail. Susan, 2 years ago you told me to stop defaming your brother and to take responsibility for my mistakes. Oh, Mom, you know I've always supported you. The thing is, I was worried about you. I didn't want you to suffer more with the legal process. It was fascinating to see how money could rewrite history, how the same people who had abandoned me in my darkest hour were now constructing narratives where they had always been on my side. Michael was even more direct in his new attitude. Mom, I've been thinking you should come and live with us. We have an extra bedroom, and it would be good to have you close to the family. Michael, when I needed help not to lose my house, you told me everyone carries their own problems. Oh, Mom, that was when I was stressed with work. You've always been welcome in my house. But the most painful call was the one I received from jail. Daniel was entitled to 1 phone call per week, and he had decided to use it to talk to me. Mom. His voice was broken, vulnerable, like when he was a child and had done something wrong. We need to talk. Now you want to talk, Daniel? Mom, I know what I did was wrong, but you can't let me rot in jail. I'm your son. It was the first time in years that he had identified himself as my son, but his words no longer had the power to manipulate me. Daniel, you yourself told me that I had lived my life and that I should let you live yours in peace. I took you at your word. Mom, please. If you help me get out of here, I promise I'll pay you back every last penny. We can start over. Like when you promised me the loan was just a formality? Like when you promised you would take care of me after your father's death? Which of your promises should I believe now? The silence on the other end of the line stretched until the call was disconnected. That night, for the first time since everything began, I didn't feel pain over the destruction of my family. I felt something that took me time to identify. Relief. The relief of finally having stopped carrying the burden of loving people who didn't love me back. The following months were the strangest of my life. For the first time in my 72 years, I had more money than I could spend. But also for the first time, I truly understood what loneliness meant. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of realizing that the people you had loved your whole life were actually strangers who had been playing a role. One May morning, while having coffee in my kitchen, I could now afford the imported coffee I had always seen at the supermarket but never bought. I received an unexpected visit. It was Sophia, my 20-year-old granddaughter, Susan's daughter. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. The last time, she had been a moody teenager who barely spoke to me during family gatherings. Now she was a young woman, a psychology student at a major state university, with smart eyes and a smile that painfully reminded me of Robert. Grandma Eleanor, may I come in? Of course, honey. Would you like some coffee? We sat in my living room, and for the first time in years, I had a real conversation with someone in my family. Sophia told me about her studies, her boyfriend, and her plans to specialize in family therapy. but there was something in the way she looked at me that told me she hadn't come just to visit. Grandma, I want you to know that I never agreed with the way my mom and my Uncle Michael treated you when everything happened with Uncle Daniel. Her words surprised me. All that time, I had assumed my grandchildren thought the same as their parents. I was younger then, but I wasn't blind. I saw how you suffered. I saw how my mom refused to help you. It made me so angry, but I didn't know what to do. Sophia, you were very young. You didn't have to get involved in adult problems. But I'm not so young anymore, Grandma. And I want you to know that I admire what you did. I admire that you fought for yourself when no one else would. For the first time in months, I felt something akin to genuine happiness. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge accomplished or the relief of justice done. It was the warmth of knowing that someone truly saw me, understood me, and respected me. You know what impresses me the most, Grandma? That after everything you went through, you didn't become bitter. You're here, in your home, at peace, not looking to hurt anyone. You think so, honey? I know so. Because if you were a vindictive person, you could do a lot of damage with all the money you have now. You could ruin my mom, my Uncle Michael, everyone who turned their backs on you. But you haven't. She was right. For all these months, I hadn't used my new financial position to hurt my other children. I hadn't cut off the education loans Susan had taken out for her children. I hadn't interfered with Michael's business. I had simply stepped away from them, like someone stepping away from a burning house to avoid getting burned. Grandma, can I ask you something personal? Of course, honey. Do you miss the family you had before? I mean, I know it wasn't real, but do you miss the feeling of having a family? The question hit me right in the heart. It was the question I myself had asked thousands of times during sleepless nights. Sophia, I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the illusion that my children loved me. But I don't miss the reality of what it truly was. Me giving everything and receiving crumbs of affection when it was convenient for them. And you don't feel lonely. I felt more alone when I was surrounded by people who used me than I do now that I'm truly alone. At least now the loneliness is honest. Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Grandma, would you mind if I visited you sometimes? Not for the money, I swear. But because I think you are the bravest person I know, and I'd like to get to know you better. That afternoon, after Sophia left, I sat in my garden, which I could now afford to keep perfectly manicured thanks to a gardener who came twice a week, and thought about how strange fate was. I had lost 3 children but had found a granddaughter. I had lost a false family, but had gained an authentic relationship. The following days were filled with changes I had never anticipated. I decided to use some of my money to do something I had always wanted, but never been able to afford. Travel. Not extravagant trips to Europe or Asia, but simple road trips within the U.S., to places I had dreamed of seeing since I was a girl. My first destination was Charleston, South Carolina. I had seen so many pictures of its historic streets, its old houses, its unique culture, that I felt as if I had already been there in my dreams. I stayed in a small hotel in the historic district, walked the cobblestone streets, tried food I hadn't known, and spoke with local artisans. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to ask anyone for permission to spend money on myself. I didn't have to justify why I wanted to visit a museum or buy a nice piece of art. The money that had been born from my pain had become the key to my freedom. During those trips, I met other women my age who, like me, had reached the stage of life where they could finally do what they wanted without permission. Some were widows who were in control of their finances for the first time. Others were divorced women who had decided it was better to be alone than in bad company. We all shared something. We had learned to value ourselves. In Savannah, Georgia, I met Martha, a 68-year-old woman who had decided to leave her husband after 40 years of marriage when she discovered he had a secret life in another state. In New Orleans, Louisiana, I met Gloria, 75, who had used her inheritance to open a small organic product business after her children tried to institutionalize her against her will. Each of these women had her own story of familial betrayal, ungrateful children, or husbands who had seen them as servants instead of partners. But they all also had something in common. They had decided that their later years were going to be for them, not to please people who didn't value them. One night, At a restaurant in Miami, while having dinner with a group of tourists I had met at the hotel, a woman from Chicago my age asked me about my family. "Do you have children, Eleanor?" The question took me by surprise. For so many years, talking about my children had been a source of pride. Daniel, the successful accountant, Susan, the respected teacher, Michael, the working mechanic. Now the question generated a completely different feeling. "I had 3 children," I finally replied, "but I don't think they really had a mother." "What do you mean?" "I think for them, I was more like a bank that lent them money and affection without interest. When the bank ran out of funds, they closed their accounts and went looking for other financial institutions." The woman laughed, but it wasn't a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of recognition from someone who had lived through something similar. "My ex-husband once told me that I had been a very good mother, but that my children no longer needed me and that he had the right to be happy with someone younger. As if raising children was a temporary job you could quit when the contract ended." That conversation made me think about something I had been avoiding. What did I want to do with the rest of my life? I had the financial resources that gave me freedom. I had reasonably good health, and I had a granddaughter who visited me and respected me. But what did I want to do with all of that? The answer came unexpectedly a week later when I returned to Boston. A letter was waiting for me, sent from the credit union where I had deposited part of my money. The director invited me to a meeting to discuss the support program for women victims of familial fraud that I had funded. During the meeting, I discovered that my donation had helped 23 women in the last 6 months. Women who, like me, had been betrayed by children, husbands, or relatives who had abused their trust to steal their savings, their homes, and their peace of mind. "Mrs. Miller," the director told me, "would you like to meet some of the women who have benefited from your program?" That afternoon, I met Rosa, 69, whose son had forged her signature to sell her house and move to another state. I met Guadalupe, 74, who had discovered her daughter-in-law had been stealing money from her account for 5 years. I met Hope, 66, whose husband had used her good credit to run up debt on her credit cards and then abandoned her with the bills. Each of these women told me her story, and in each story, I saw mine reflected. But I also saw something else. I saw the difference that having access to timely legal and psychological help had made. Several of them had managed to recover some of their assets. All of them had recovered their dignity. It was at that moment that I knew what I wanted to do with my new life. 6 months after that meeting at the credit union, my life had taken a turn I never would have imagined. I had converted a part of my apartment into an office and created the Eleanor Miller Foundation, dedicated exclusively to helping elderly women victims of familial fraud. The name was no coincidence. Grace had been my middle name, and it also represented what I wanted to give to other women who found themselves in the situation I had been in. Every morning, I woke up with a clear purpose. I was no longer just Eleanor, the woman who had been betrayed by her son. Now I was Eleanor Miller, the woman who had transformed her pain into a tool to help others. The difference was vast. Sophia had decided to do her community service with me at the foundation. Twice a week she came to help me with cases, and little by little, she had become not only my assistant, but the daughter I never truly had. She was intelligent, compassionate, and had that fresh perspective that only younger generations can provide. "Grandma, we have 3 new cases this week," she told me one October morning as we reviewed the files. A woman from Queens whose son sold her house without her knowledge, one from Brooklyn who discovered her grandson had been using her credit cards, and one from Staten Island whose daughter-in-law convinced her to sign documents to protect her inheritance, but which actually transferred everything to her name. Each case was a stab in the heart, but also an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. We had managed to recover assets worth over $500,000 for our beneficiaries, and more importantly, we had helped dozens of women recover their self-esteem and sense of dignity. The case that marked me the most was that of Mrs. Consuelo, a 78-year-old woman who came to the foundation in an almost catatonic state. Her only son had completely emptied her retirement account to fund a restaurant business that failed within 6 months. When she tried to confront him, he had threatened to put her in a nursing home if she kept causing trouble. "Mrs. Miller," Mrs. Consuelo told me during our first interview, her voice so broken it was barely audible. "I don't know if it's worth living anymore. My own son told me I was a burden, that I had fulfilled my purpose in life." Those words immediately transported me back to my own nightmares. It was exactly what Daniel had said. "You've lived your life. Let me live mine." "Mrs. Consuelo," I replied, taking her wrinkled hands in mine, "I'm going to tell you something it took me 72 years to learn. Our purpose in life is not defined by our children. It is defined by ourselves. Every day we choose to get up and keep going." We worked on her case for 4 months. We managed to recover 80% of her money, and more importantly, we successfully prosecuted her son for elder financial abuse. But the true victory was seeing Mrs. Consuelo regain her inner strength, seeing her eyes sparkle again, and her voice regain firmness. The last time I saw her, she had started taking painting classes at her local community center and was considering adopting a cat for company. "Mrs. Miller, you saved my life," she told me that day. "No, Mrs. Consuelo, you saved yourself. I only lent you the tools." But not all cases ended successfully. Some came too late, when there were no assets left to recover, or when the women were too emotionally broken to keep fighting. These cases hurt me especially because they reminded me how close I had come to giving up myself. One November afternoon, while reviewing one of these difficult cases, I received an unexpected call. It was Susan. "Mom, I urgently need to talk to you." Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard before, panic mixed with humiliation. "What's wrong, Susan?" "It's about Sophia. I heard she's working with you at your foundation thing." "That's right. Sophia is doing her community service with me. She's a very intelligent and committed young woman." "Mom, you can't involve my daughter in your vendettas against the family. Sophia is very impressionable. She doesn't understand the complexities of what happened with Daniel." The word vendettas stung like a slap. "Susan, helping women who have been victims of fraud is not a vendetta. It's social justice." "Mom, please. You already won. You already have your money. You already proved you were right. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to keep stirring up the past?" "Because there are dozens of women who are living what I lived. And if my experience can help them, then something good will have come out of all this pain. But Sophia doesn't have to be involved in this. She's my daughter, not yours." That phrase hurt me more than Susan could have imagined. She was right. Sophia wasn't my daughter. But in these months, I had developed with my granddaughter the relationship I had always dreamed of having with my own children, a relationship based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and disinterested affection. "Susan, Sophia is an adult. She can decide for herself who she wants to spend her time with. Mom, if you don't stop putting my daughter into your affairs, I'm going to have to forbid her from visiting you. You're going to threaten your own daughter so she won't see her grandmother? Doesn't that strike you as exactly the kind of familial manipulation we're fighting against at the foundation?" Susan hung up without answering. That night, when Sophia arrived to help me with some files, I told her about her mother's call. "Oh, Grandma, my mom already called me. She's super mad." "And what do you think, honey?" Sophia sat on the sofa in my living room, in the same spot where years ago I had cried over Daniel's betrayal, and looked at me with a maturity that surprised me. "Grandma, I told my mom that what you're doing is the most important thing I've ever seen. In college, we study all sorts of theories on social justice and human rights, but here with you, I'm seeing how it's actually applied, how lives are truly changed. Aren't you afraid your mom will be angry with you?" "Of course I'm afraid, but I'm more afraid of becoming the kind of person who prefers silence over doing what's right. My mom, my Uncle Michael, my Uncle Daniel, they all chose comfort over justice when you needed them most. I don't want to be like that." Her words filled me with a pride I had never felt as a mother, but that I now experienced as a grandmother. Sophia represented the possibility that the new generations could break the cycles of abuse and familial neglect that seemed to repeat themselves over and over. 2 weeks later, Susan carried out her threat. She arrived at my house accompanied by Michael and her husband in what was clearly a planned family intervention. "Mom, we've come to talk to you about the situation with Sophia," Susan began, using the condescending tone she had perfected over years of being an elementary school teacher. "There is no situation with Sophia. She comes here of her own free will to help with the foundation's work. Mom, it's clear that you've manipulated my daughter into taking your side against the family, Michael intervened. Sophia never had problems with us before, and now she's going around saying we're abusive. And aren't you? I asked with a calm that surprised me. When I needed help, you told me to take responsibility for my mistakes. When I discovered Daniel had swindled me, you told me to stop defaming him. When I was about to lose my house, you told me everyone carries their own problems. What would you call that behavior? Mom, we're past all that, Susan said. You won the lawsuit. You got your money back. Why can't we just start over as a family? Because starting over requires acknowledging what was wrong the first time, and you still believe you did nothing wrong. Susan's husband, who had remained quiet until then, decided to intervene. Mrs. Miller, with all due respect, I think you're being too hard on your children. They made mistakes, yes, but at the end of the day they are still your family. And what exactly do you want from me? I asked directly. The three exchanged uncomfortable glances before Michael replied. We want you to stop filling Sophia's head with anti-family ideas. And, well, we also think it would be fair for you to help us out financially. After all, we are your children too, and it's not fair that Daniel got away with all the family's money. There was the truth. They hadn't come out of love, for reconciliation, or out of genuine concern for Sophia. They had come for money. Once again, it all came down to money. I understand. You want me to give you money and to stop teaching my granddaughter that elderly women deserve respect and dignity. Mom, don't put it that way. How else should I put it, Susan? You abandoned me when I was poor, and now you return because I'm rich. Do you really expect me not to see the pattern? That meeting ended as it had to, with my children leaving angry and me staying more convinced than ever that I had made the right decisions. But the most important thing was that Sophia, who had listened to the entire conversation from the kitchen, came out when they left and hugged me with a fierceness that reminded me of Robert. Grandma, I'm so proud of you. And I want you to know that no matter what my mom says, I'm going to keep working with you. This is too important to abandon because of family pressure. In that moment, I understood that I had achieved something I had never consciously sought. I had raised a granddaughter who had the moral strength that my own children never developed. And perhaps that was the true victory of this whole story. The first anniversary of the Eleanor Miller Foundation came faster than I had expected. In 12 months, we had helped 57 women recover a total of over $1 million in assets stolen by relatives. But more important than the numbers was the transformation I had seen in each of these women and the one I had experienced in myself. To celebrate the anniversary, we decided to host an event in my garden. It wasn't an ostentatious celebration, but an intimate gathering where the women we had helped could share their stories of recovery and strength. Sophia had insisted we invite journalists and social workers, arguing that it was important to shine a light on this type of abuse, which was often silenced by familial shame. On the afternoon of the event, while Sophia and I were setting up chairs in my garden, an unexpected surprise arrived. It was Ms. Gloria Jenkins, my longtime neighbor, the same one who years ago had muttered about my misfortune when she thought I couldn't hear her. Eleanor, honey, can I talk to you for a minute? Her tone was completely different from the one she had used with me during the worst moments of my crisis. Now there was respect in her voice, even something that sounded like admiration. Of course, Gloria. What do you need? Well, I feel terrible saying this to you, but I think I need your help. She told me that her son, the one who had always been so responsible and loving, had been taking money from her savings account for the past 2 years to fund a used car sales business that existed only in his imagination. When she confronted him, he told her it was borrowed money, and he would pay it back when the business took off. Now she had discovered that he had also used her house as collateral for a bank loan without telling her. Eleanor, I know I behaved badly toward you when the thing with Daniel happened. I was one of the ones gossiping about you, saying that you were probably to blame for what happened. But now I understand that this can happen to anyone. Gloria, you don't have to apologize. Pain makes us do things that aren't right. The important thing is that you know now that you are not alone. That day, seeing Ms. Jenkins sitting among the other women in the support group Listening to their stories and sharing her own with tears but without shame, I understood something profound about the nature of forgiveness. It wasn't about forgetting the wounds or pretending they hadn't existed. It was about understanding that shared pain can be converted into collective strength. During the event, a young journalist from a local newspaper approached me for an interview. Her questions were direct and made me reflect on the path I had traveled. "Mrs. Miller, did you ever imagine that your personal tragedy would turn into a life mission?" Never. During the worst times, all I wanted was to survive one more day. I never thought my pain could be used for something constructive. What would you say to other women who are experiencing similar situations? Don't stay silent out of shame. Familial financial abuse is a crime, not a private domestic issue. And never, ever is it too late to fight back. Have you had contact with your son Daniel since he was released from jail? The question caught me by surprise. Daniel had been released 6 months earlier after serving his minimum sentence for good behavior. I knew he was living in Boston, working as an accountant for a small firm, but we hadn't had any direct contact. No, and I'm not looking for him either. Some wounds don't heal with time, they just learn to hurt less. Do you not believe in familial forgiveness? I believe in forgiveness as a personal liberation. I have forgiven Daniel in the sense that I no longer carry rage towards him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean I should allow someone who hurt me once to have the chance to do it again. That night, after all the guests had left and Sophia helped me clean up, we sat in my living room having tea and reflecting on the day. "Grandma, don't you ever miss having a normal family? Like those families that gather at Christmas and truly love each other?" It was a question I had asked myself thousands of times during sleepless nights. "Sophia, I miss the idea of having a family like that, but I don't think I ever truly had one. What I had was a very convincing illusion of family, sustained by my need to believe that my sacrifices had been worthwhile. And you don't feel lonely? I feel peaceful, which is very different. For years I felt lonely while surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. Now I am truly alone in familial terms. But I have purpose, I have peace, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that my life has value beyond what I can give to others." A week after the event, I received an unexpected letter. The sender was Daniel. The return address showed he was living in a modest apartment complex in the outer boroughs, far from the European luxury he had enjoyed with my money. I held the letter in my hands for several minutes before deciding to open it. Part of me was curious, but another part feared it was another attempt at manipulation. The letter was surprisingly brief. "Mom, I heard about your foundation in the papers. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm also not writing to ask for money because I understand that I am no longer your son in any real sense of the word. I only write to tell you that I see the photos in the papers, where you are smiling with all those women you've helped, and I realize that you are stronger than I ever believed. I was wrong when I thought you had lived your life. It turns out you were just starting it. Daniel." I read the letter 3 times. There were no pleas or attempts at justification. There were no dramatic declarations of love or repentance. Only the recognition, perhaps belated, that he had destroyed something valuable for something that turned out to be temporarily glamorous, but fundamentally empty. That night, I didn't put the letter in a box or tape it to the refrigerator as I used to do with my children's letters. I put it in my desk drawer, along with other important but unsentimental documents. It was evidence that Daniel still existed, but he was no longer part of my emotional life. The next day, while working on a particularly difficult case, an 80-year-old woman whose daughter had sold her house without consent to pay gambling debts, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Eleanor Miller?" "Yes, speaking. My name is Mr. Howard Davies, from the National Council on Elder Abuse. We have been following your foundation's work and would like to invite you to participate in a national program for the prevention of elder financial abuse." The proposal was exciting. The federal government wanted to use our foundation's model as the basis for a nationwide program. This would mean resources to help hundreds more women, training for social workers across the country, and the possibility of changing laws to better protect seniors. Mrs. Miller, your personal story, combined with the success of your foundation, makes you the ideal person to lead this project. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my office for long minutes, processing what had just happened. My personal betrayal had become a platform for creating real social change. The deepest pain of my life had been transformed into the most powerful tool to help others. That afternoon, when Sophia arrived for work, I told her about the government's call. "Grandma, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means? Your story is going to protect thousands of women across the country. Sophia, do you think it was worth it? Everything I went through, all the betrayal, all the pain. If it ultimately helps other people, do you think it was worth it?" My granddaughter looked at me with those young but wise eyes that reminded me so much of Robert. "Grandma, I don't think you went through all of that for it to be worth it. You went through all of that because sometimes life is unfair. But what you did do was decide what to do with that injustice. And that decision, that is worth everything." Her words stayed with me that night as I got ready for bed in the same place where I had cried so many nights after Daniel's betrayal. Now, instead of crying, I stayed awake making plans for the national program, thinking about all the women we could help, imagining a future where no elderly woman had to face the abuse of her own relatives alone. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerful. Not the power that comes from money or revenge, but the power that comes from knowing that your existence makes a real difference in the world. 2 years after that conversation with Sophia, my life had changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. The national program had been a resounding success. We had established support centers in 25 states and had helped over 2,000 women recover their assets and their dignity. But more important than the numbers was the cultural transformation we were achieving. American families were beginning to speak openly about financial abuse toward seniors, a topic that was previously hidden by shame. One March morning, while reviewing reports from the different centers in my office, which now occupied the entire first floor of my house, I received a call that deeply surprised me. It was Maria, the coordinator of the Atlanta Center. "Mrs. Miller, I have a very particular case I need to consult you on. A woman named Susan Miller wants to register for our program." The name immediately caught my attention. "Susan Miller? By any chance, do you know if she's a teacher?" "Yes, indeed. She's an elementary school teacher. She says her oldest son and daughter-in-law have been stealing money from her retirement account, and she wants to sue them." "Mrs. Miller, do you know her?" "Susan. My daughter Susan had decided to seek help at one of the centers I had founded, unaware that her own mother was the program's creator. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed like the work of fate." "Maria, yes, I know her. She's my daughter." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Your daughter?" "Mrs. Miller, what would you like me to do? Should I reject her application?" "No, Maria. Treat her exactly like any other beneficiary. If she is truly a victim of familial financial abuse, she deserves the same help as any other woman." "Are you sure? Wouldn't that be a conflict of interest?" "My work in this foundation has never been personal, Maria. It is about justice. And justice should not depend on family ties." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Susan, the same one who had abandoned me when I needed her most, the one who had told me to stop defaming Daniel, the one who had tried to manipulate Sophia to keep her away from me, now needed exactly the kind of help I had created. That afternoon, I told Sophia about the call. My granddaughter had grown a lot in these years, not just in age, but in wisdom. She was now 24, had finished her psychology degree, and worked full-time at the foundation as the national case coordinator. "Grandma, how do you feel about this?" "Honestly, Sophia, I don't know. Part of me feels a strange satisfaction that Susan is experiencing what I went through, but another part of me, the part that is still a mother despite everything, feels sad for her." "Are you going to get involved in her case?" "Not directly, but I am going to make sure she receives the best help possible. Because it's one thing to feel satisfaction over poetic justice, and a very different thing to allow someone to suffer when you have the power to help." Over the following weeks, Maria kept me informed about the progress of Susan's case. The situation was heartbreakingly familiar. Her oldest son, Robert, my grandson, named after his grandfather, had convinced Susan to make him a co-signer on her retirement account to facilitate paperwork when she was older. For 2 years, he and his wife had been systematically withdrawing money, telling her they were family loans that they would repay when their financial situation improved. When Susan finally reviewed her statements, she discovered they had taken over $50,000. When she confronted them, her daughter-in-law yelled that old people were a burden on young families, and that it was time for the grandparents to contribute to the grandchildren's expenses. Robert, instead of defending his mother, supported his wife and told Susan that if she kept causing trouble, he would forbid her from seeing her grandchildren. It was the exact same pattern of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and financial abuse that I had experienced with Daniel. Susan was experiencing the pain of discovering that the son she trusted most was capable of betraying her with calculated coldness. A month after Susan's case began, Maria called me again. Mrs. Miller, Susan has asked several times about the program's founder. I think she is starting to suspect who you are. What should I tell her if she asks me directly? Tell her the truth, Maria. If she asks, do not lie. 2 days later, my phone rang at 9 in the evening. It was Susan. Her voice was broken, completely different from the arrogant, condescending woman who had come to my house years ago. Mom, it's Susan. Hello, honey. How are you? Mom, I know it's you. The foundation, the program, everything. I know you're behind all of it. And how do you feel about that? There was a long silence, occasionally interrupted by small sobs. I feel like the biggest idiot in the world. For years, I thought you were weak, that you had been foolish for trusting Daniel. And now the exact same thing is happening to me. Robert is doing exactly what Daniel did to you. Susan, familial financial abuse is not something that only happens to foolish or weak people. It can happen to anyone because it is based on the trust we naturally have in the people we love. Mom, when you needed my help, I told you to take responsibility for your mistakes. I told you to stop blaming others. And now I am living exactly what you lived through, and I understand that it wasn't your fault, that it was never your fault. Her words went straight to my heart in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just an apology. It was the recognition that she finally understood what I had gone through. Susan, would you like us to talk in person? I don't know if I have the right to ask you that. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness after how I treated you. Forgiveness is not something to be earned, honey. It's something that is given when you are ready to give it. And I am ready. We met 3 days later at a cafe in the South End, not far from where this whole story had unfolded. Susan arrived on time, but she looked very different from the woman I remembered. She had graying hair, deep circles under her eyes, and that expression of confusion and pain that I knew so well. We sat at a table by the window, and for the first time in years, my daughter truly looked into my eyes. Mom, I haven't come to ask for money. I haven't come to ask you to solve my problems. I've just come to ask for your forgiveness. I'm listening. When you called me to tell me about Daniel, my first reaction was to think you were exaggerating, that there must have been a logical explanation. But deep down, I think I didn't want to face the reality that my brother was capable of something like that. She paused to drink some water, and I saw her hands tremble slightly. Later, when you started fighting Daniel legally, I thought you were being vindictive, that a good mother forgives everything, no matter what. But now I understand you weren't being vindictive. You were defending yourself, and you had every right in the world to defend yourself. Susan, what are you going to do about Robert? I've already started the legal process, with the help of your foundation. It's so strange, you know? Receiving help from the organization my own mother founded to help women like the ones we created by abandoning you. Don't think of it as a cruel irony, honey. Think of it as a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently this time. Mom, is there any possibility that you and I can start over? Not as if nothing happened, because I know that's impossible. But maybe we can build something new on the ruins of what we destroyed. The question I had been waiting for years had finally arrived, and the answer surprised even me. Susan, I am willing to try, but it has to be on completely different terms. I am no longer the woman who needed her children's approval to feel valuable, And you can no longer be the daughter who believes she has the right to judge her mother's decisions without offering support. What do you need from me? I need you to publicly acknowledge what happened, to be a spokesperson for the foundation, to tell your story to help other families avoid making the same mistakes we made. Your testimony could prevent other daughters from abandoning their mothers as you abandoned me. Susan nodded slowly. Yes, I can do that. I want to do that. For the first time in years, I truly saw my daughter. Not the projection of my maternal expectations, not the idealized construct of what a daughter should be, but the real Susan, a 52-year-old woman who had made terrible mistakes but had the courage to acknowledge them and the determination to make amends. It was a start. It wasn't the perfect reconciliation of the movies, but it was real, honest, and based on mutual respect instead of familial obligation. Perhaps it was exactly what we both needed.